Okay, so I will continue admit people in to our room from the waiting room. But hello, everyone. I want to welcome you on behalf of Viper Gallery from Prague this evening or evening in Prague. My name is Irena and I will introduce our speakers today. We are joined by Christine Giorgio, filmmaker and architect, Gabriel Vergara, architect and urban designer, and Amelyn, architect and currently assistant professor of architecture at the Rhode Island School of Design. Together with Nathan Davis, composer and sound artist who did all the incredible sounds in the exhibition, which you will see and hear today. Next to our three curators, I want to also welcome Neyran Turan, currently an associate professor of architecture at the University of California, Berkeley, and a founding partner of NEMESTUDIO, who will be our respondent today. The project, Planetary Home Improvement from Just in Time to Geological Time, was selected from the open call we launched as a gallery in December 2020. It was our second open call. And at this point, I also want to thank the members of the jury who selected this project. And we were working on this closely with the team over the last 9 months or so. The exhibition runs through February 12th, 2022. So if you are from Prague or you will be in Prague, stop by. I will just ask everyone if you can mute yourself and turn off the camera after the presentation and response from Neyran. There will be a Q&A session. So please stay with us. And lastly, thanks again to all the speakers today, as well as the audience for joining us from different continents, time zones, and climate. And the floor is yours, guys.
Fantastic. Thank you, Rina. So I might just share screen. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining our talk on planetary home improvement from just in time to geological time. The project is co-curated by Gabriel Vergara, Christine Giorgio, and myself, with Nathan Davis. We'd like to thank Irena and Bara at Viper Gallery for their invitation and kind support, and a huge thank you to the names here, without whom this wouldn't have been possible. And for those who are in the audience and you are one of the collaborators, please do put your orange backgrounds on as well. So in the spirit of our interdisciplinary team, we will each share a brief perspective on the project, expanding its themes in relation to our own research and practice. Neyran Turan, whose work and thinking are strikingly relevant to the show, will follow with a response. But first, what is so planetary about home improvement? This early drawing was a conceptual device for us, a general house section whose layers of enclosure are annotated not by standard specifications, but by terrestrial age. The home building industry is a system of planetary proportions, and we don't just mean globalization. From Home Depot in the US to Bauhaus in Europe, the DIY store is a geological site on demand. Rock wool, sheetrock, quickcrete. Today's standardized and flat-packed material economies are severed from mineral entanglements with millennia of rock, fossil, plant, and stone. Basalt, gypsum, limestone. It takes 1 day to install drywall. It takes 299 million years to form gypsum. At Viper, digital and physical artifacts restage the geological timescale through a longue durée of standardized material life, challenging the idea that products are ahistorical or unlimited in supply. Framed by orange studs, the warehouse wall of shelves is reorganized as bays of reclaimed data for public perusal. A geologic time soundscape emanates from suspended drawings using these products as instruments. In the side gallery, a cacophony of how-to videos project onto a workbench. More details will be revealed by my peers. In this brief space, I will attend to the idea of material media, the interplay of digital and physical matter, through three elements central to the business of home improvement: the warehouse, the barcode, and the instruction manual. So, warehouse. Between mineral extraction and purchased product is a vast apparatus of accumulation found in the offsite warehouse, a massive 24-hour waiting room that makes the on-demand possible. In the case of the home improvement store, the warehouse is often also the storefront, making aisles and bays do double duty of storage and display. In this environment of ready-made accumulation, there is no blemished or broken object in sight. Our gallery is stocked a bit differently, not by department or by quantity, but as stratigraphic stacks of time. Looking closely, these materials are almost all secondhand, sourced and negotiated by our proud colleagues from construction sites in the vicinity, or leftovers recovered from the gallery basement. Offcuts were trimmed, sawn, cleaned, and coordinated in 4 tectonic bays: metals, the most ancient; rocks; plastics, aka oil; and woods, the youngest. They resemble the geologic time chart, a typically abstract scientific representation. Now, faced with dented pipes and surplus wool, the exercise tested and exceeded our efforts in pre-planned measured drawing. Our mock-up in Providence and on-site install underscored just how much tacit knowledge figures into DIY work and the labor of finding, testing, pressing, laying, and playing with irregular materials. Another question we hoped to pose was, can material time be felt? Welcome to the online store, an automatically slow-scrolling website whose product homepage references the geologic chart again, frustrating hurried users used to the immediacy of the screen. In this digital warehouse, product icons float by, waiting to be clicked on in the depths of their strata. You are currently shopping in the Carboniferous period. 360 million years ago, reads the status bar as it ticks backwards, out of sync with speed and growth. Perhaps like slow TV or slow film, slow browsing might allow websites to register some level of deep time. And so this relates to our next media artifact. The unit upon which all logistical management rests is arguably the barcode. The bigger the inventory and wider the product range, most warehouses rely on inventory tagging to identify, track, and manage their commodities. Simply by laminating media to material, the machine-readable 1D or 2D sticker renders objects as data, enabling present-day typologies such as the random storage warehouse, where different products are scanned and shelved together with locational precision. Note that scanning devices track not just objects, but also people. My past work on information-rich media has explored the digital management of buildings and bodies in space and their politics. Amazon's handheld and wristband scanners are known to measure worker productivity in space and time. Meanwhile, Home Depot's barcode scanning mobile app, mantra see, scan, save, turns everyone and everything in the warehouse into a potential data point, bringing, quote, DIY in the palm of your hand, easing navigation through store aisles while collecting user activity. Barcodes allow physical things to be connected with added information that can't fit on the label: product cost, dimensional properties, weight, SKU number, manufacturer's instructions, and other economic or functional parameters. But tags are a small but powerful lever of misappropriation. In Seasonal Associate, author and former Amazon employee Heike Geisler describes how her act of workplace disobedience took the form of mislabeling products. What if you scanned a code only to find a story about a material's pre-shelf life? On your mobile phone, gallery codes take you directly to a product page. Each product features a geological bio and an abbreviated supply chain outlining extraction or manufacturing processes, a small nod to Jane Hutton's work on stories of material movements. These details were based on our own back-end spreadsheet, where we stored ongoing research on geological periods, mineral compositions, and industrial facts. Our online store thus became a database of material stories, citations which will perhaps accumulate over time to include video links, location maps, or other metrics. Lastly, at Hornbach, QR codes were spotted linking customers to installation tips and tricks. The cartoonist in me started to lean into the most prosaic material story of all, the instruction manual. Instructions are sequential narratives that choreograph amateur labor. They document an intended use or best practice with ruthless graphic simplicity. They are limiting yet accessible. Today, a format might exist to archive post-consumer practices. Our online store features a couple of Easter eggs, DIY instructions focused instead on unbuilding and reuse culture. Here is one on how to recoup irregular bricks in solid or powder states, and another on how to save drywall offcuts or return gypsum to the earth as soil amendment. After Stephen Jackson's broken world thinking, these micro comics feature repair and breakdown as part of a product identity. So to conclude, this project seeks to exercise narrative and history, to express duration and delay, to archive DIY tactics of reuse, echoing Dipesh Chakrabarty by bringing the geological to the everyday. In my own work, I continue to ponder geo-associations for formats, such as the Architect's Materials Samples Board. Connecting media with material might make that cognitive leap between ancient and instant, tracing the hyperobject that is planet or climate. And with that, I'll pass it on to my colleague, Gabriel. Thanks.
Thank you, Amelyn. Give me a second, I'm going to share a screen. Can you see? Yeah, well, thank you everyone for joining today. So picking up from the last presentation, I'll talk about the drawing component of our exhibition. As architects and designers, we use drawings as complementary tools to expand the narratives of our built environment. In my personal work, I use drawing and representational tools as a storytelling practice that allows me to engage and expand narrative of under-the-served communities. For example, here some images working with New York Housing Authority communities, with different organizations right now working with Asian initiatives in this kind of projects. This also allows me to explore and research urban issues like a postcard from the border, a project I did in El Paso and Ciudad Juarez border region, and envision new spatial practices involving human and non-human actors as well in the design practice. But in the case of Planetary Home Improvement, drawing seeks to trace the geological narratives of common materials. We question how could we capture the planetary implications of the standardized materials into a single drawing? Our first approach was to represent time. When we studied the geological time of the Earth and tried to scale it, we found it difficult to represent the time in drawing form, mainly because its scale and scope is so immeasurable. Most maps are made in plan, giving nothing away about what lies below the surface. But we also found that geologists use sectional charts to describe and represent the Earth. In these charts, geological periods are embedded in their abstract representation. These charts relate rocks and minerals with their processes of deep formation over time. Geologists also work with digital cartographic standards for map symbolization. These are graphic codes, these hatches, that represent rocks and minerals. So in this case, we adapted the USGS symbology as a representational tool for the purposes of our project. In our research, we found a variety of drawings. For example, the geological cartography of Prague, which included sections with its plans, show us that deep section drawings could be an excellent tool to represent the space and time together. while most geological charts we found tend to be super site specific, we also found a geological chart, this one, created for didactic purposes by Levi Walter Yagi in 1893, which depicts a generic cross-section of the Earth crust. Taking this as our starting point, we incorporated a series of human activities and material products related to the extraction processes of rocks and minerals. So the final set of drawing we created, which is this one, depicts generalized Earth sections divided into 4 parts in direct reference to the stack. So metals, rocks, plastics, and woods. Each of them shows different extraction activities involving the production of these 4 material categories. These sections reveal another dimension of extraction and its operational landscapes. One depicts, for example, an iron mining, while others shows gypsum quarry, oil migration up to an offshore extraction ring, and a pine radiata pine plantation. We see how deep they operate in the Earth crust, crossing through layers of water bodies, rock layers, to reach as deep as ores, where minerals formed from Precambrian times became part of metal roof panels or dry wall partitions we use in our homes today. The standardized materials and finished products float on the top of each drawing, like the icons found in the website. A series of lines link them to multiple layers of rocks and mineral strata. By revealing multiple components embedded in the single material, we show that extractive activities taking place on the surface are only partial moments in the process of standardization. Let's take wood panels, for instance. Their fast growth is fueled by the forest industry, where much of its impacts occurred are very top in the newest layers of the Earth crust, in the Oligocene, basically, which is only 12,000 years old. But their manufacturing processes also involve soft products like petroleum waxes made from oil and coal shales, which mainly come from Carboniferous periods, which dates back 300, 400 million years. Just like wood panels, most of these end products are actually amalgams of many raw materials, minerals, and sophisticated chemical soft products, each with different depths, edges, and manufacturing chains. Note that the drawings are printed on actual material themselves, so polycarbonate, galvanized steel, foam insulation, and plywood. Each of them is representative of its specific narrative. Distributed across the gallery and suspended from the ceiling, these drawing panels also act as geological speakers connected to the soundscape. This will be explained further by my peers later. So to finalize, these deep section drawings, like other graphic charts, acts as an informational tool to understand how long-term processes of rock formation intersect with just-in-time materiality. It spatializes extraction and allows us to set a critical viewpoint about its planetary implications. We bring to the surface the deep interconnections between inorganic and organic matter as well. Animal and plants that inhabit the Earth millions of years ago are today directly and indirectly part of the matter that embodied our built environment and material culture in general. So raising awareness about these themes may help us to imagine alternative futures and move toward new material practices. So with that, I will pass into my colleague, Nathan, and thank you.
Thank you, Gabriel. I'll begin to share my screen as well. So I am a composer and percussionist. My practice is object-oriented. By that, I mean that I look to the materials themselves to try to find what they want to do. Perhaps something like architect Louis Kahn holding conversations with a brick. Whether I'm working with fashioned instruments or with found objects, my aim is to make music that reveals their characters and characteristics. And as a sometime instrument builder, my trips to Home Depot usually involve tapping, shaking, and striking supplies I find there, looking for a resonant plank, finding some exquisite overtones in a section of conduit pipe. Sometimes I get funny looks. So in creating the soundscape for this exhibition, I found the opportunity to further interrogate that habit and expand the points of contact I could make in the life cycle of these materials. So I created a 40-minute soundscape that is broadcast in 7 discrete channels, which is played primarily through raw construction panels. These materials are used in 2 ways: as sound sources, collected and recorded for later manipulation and playback, and as a resonator or soundboard to be heard in real time. The sounds are derived from 6 sources, field recordings of the unmodified raw material described in the stacks: metal, stone, plastic, and wood, recorded on site. Also field recordings involving air and water, essential to the formation of those materials. I also recorded off-the-shelf construction panels, which are in fact in a new raw state made for convenience. Then I recorded musical instruments, which are constructed from these materials. Together with that, I added sounds of violent extraction for context. This is mining, fracking, deforestation, oil exploration, etc. There's also a narrator's voice, which is used to describe the materials, to describe the how-to video, and also is used as a sound object itself. In bringing these sounds into a gallery, which is itself constructed from these materials, the soundscape is intended to metaphorically represent aspects of geological time that we can understand, as well as the complex and interwoven processes acting to form the materials. So field recording has been a big part of my practice for some 25 years, and I was able to draw from already recorded materials and also make some new ones. Made lots of recordings of water, in France, I found the trou souffleur, or blowing hole, which is in karst stone found about 10 meters above and about 10 meters inland from the sea in Cassis, France. It blows when crashing waves force air through naturally formed tubes in the rock. And stones themselves, which I've returned to many, many times as instruments. So, as I said, the sounding materials are used in 2 ways. Here are the panels used as sources, and these same panels are used as speakers. I will let our narrator, Sylvia Milo, describe them each to you, and perhaps you can read ahead about how they're turned into speakers as well.
1. Galvanized steel sheet. 2. Foam insulation. 3. Polycarbonate panel. 4. acoustical ceiling tile.
So as I said, these same panels are suspended and heard as speakers in the gallery. They form thereby an ensemble of instruments that can play back any audio that is sent to them. I also worked with musicians from the International Contemporary Ensemble with more metaphoric prompts to encourage improvisation in the idea of these different concepts. So you'll see I have both natural and Anthropocene prompts for each of these materials. All of these sounds go through a software patch that I built and call a traverser. The idea here is that the sound files are moved through stepwise, but not linearly. So it will algorithmically shift, slip, judder, stutter, jump, accumulate, and repeat with separate operations for each channel and each material. I thought of these as analogous to sedimentation in crystalline processes. Freeze will randomly take a vertical section of audio, which I think of as a core sample, and plays it back indefinitely through a randomly determined panel or panels. These panels surround the visitors in an acoustic environment. Again, I have an image of the polycarbonate panel with the drawing that Gabriel described, pointing to where it's located in the plan, in the audio block diagram plan of the exhibition. And finally, I just want to leave you with a visitor experience of walking through these and hearing the various sources from near and far. Thank you. And with that, I will hand this to Christine.
Wow, thank you, Nathan. Okay, let me just share. Hi, everyone. I'm going to be speaking today about the how-to video and also aspects of home improvement and DIY culture that speak to notions of time, unsettled, possible, and repeatable. As you've heard from my colleague's presentation, this exhibition finds fertile ground and grows from the place where our varied individual interests and practices converge. If that theoretical place has a physical representation, it might be Home Depot, where we found ourselves on February 11th of 2021. We knew we were interested in the geological provenance of common building materials and material economies that seem to scale up endlessly from what we thought was a settled geological past, possible futures, and ancient history. So it made sense to begin our field research and material testing here, where we could experiment with scales of material from the retail dimension to the cart to the tabletop. Here we experienced the sheer weight of these products and the labor and equipment required to move and stack them. This led us to a digital representation where it was much easier to work with awkward panelized products and to rearrange them at will. These on-demand rocks and minerals are processed, stockpiled, and sold and installed with a precise modus operandi. They are not packaged with explicit instructions, but they do come with a tacit understanding for how, when, and where to use them. And if explicit instruction is desired, YouTube posts an innumerable amount of how-to videos. These videos have the ability to demystify a process. They can show you how to install a new bathroom tile or pour foundation for an extension. They often emphasize speed and are tailored to a specific product, like Quickcrete or Saccrete or QuickTile. And they make visual the aspirational quality of home improvement, the possible future. For Planetary Home Improvement, we imagine these how-to videos as a multi-tool that could both visualize the future and imagine a possible geological past. Common building materials were used as set pieces and recreations of sedimentary surface actions, metamorphic shuffling, viscous slurry, shiny liquid sputtering. We set this video atop a work table, painted safety orange, a color meant to set an object apart from its background. So back in the gallery, a narrator's voice draws visitors into a darkened side room, where after passing under a suspended ceiling tile, the orange work table sits just off center in the room. The table is cut from a scrap sheet of plywood. It is a table, but it is also a screen with an aspect ratio of roughly 2:1. The how-to video is projected onto this table/screen from above. The video is a palindrome loop, meaning a place forward and then backward and then forward again, and so on. In the video, 2 DIYers gather the tools needed for various home improvement projects. Their work is organized into 5 acts: finishing, framing, insulating, plumbing, and excavating, the process of construction in reverse. As the DIYers, or doers in the eyes of Home Depot, place their tools on the table, clips from YouTube tutorials, spinning product shots, and moving images suggestive of those products' geological origins join the milieu. Working its way back through construction time, the video sheds light on home improvement's myriad methods of reordering geological accumulation quickly and repeatedly. As the video loops, the narrator recites dialogue from these instructional videos, reminding you to keep your plans handy and telling you how to repair a damaged section of drywall using an oscillating tool by making a plunge cut into the wall. She kindly reminds you to slightly overfill your concrete formwork.
And it's crushed. After you lay the underlayment, you'll want to use tape to cover the seam. These are real porcelain tiles with tongue and groove system attached to the bottom.
The rhythm of this re-recorded narration is unmistakably slower, and the voice unmistakably feminine. a design departure from the instructional video genre. She's meant to sound observational and deliberate, a more mindful approach to the work of home improvement, and perhaps focused on the present rather than the future. In the year leading up to the conception of Planetary Home Improvement, COVID-19 and related stay-at-home orders were fueling a global surge in do-it-yourself activity. This activity is fed by stores like Home Depot and Hornbach. Retail shops like these had become an essential service and were places where potential doers could graze in wide, well-organized aisles. Imagining a future DIY project, or perhaps remembering what things were like before. Because in addition to the acceleration of home improvement activity, there was also a general slowing down, a renewed interest in slow culture, and for some, a stance against productivity. My own artistic practice is rooted in that slowed down space, the one between made and unmade, the one of excavated past remade, where nothing is ever quite finished. Which brings us back to home improvement. Not unlike geology's fluvial faulting aeolian processes, it's an aspirational, never quite there, perpetual future state. Does improvement end? Is there such a state as improved? With that, we conclude our presentation of the components of the exhibition, and we welcome Neyran Turan to respond and continue the conversation. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, everyone, for having me, and also all these fantastic presentations. I really want to see the exhibition. Can I just visit pretty soon and have another response? So what I'm going to do is I really want to obviously diverse voices, and I'll come to this, but I think the kind of nature of the curatorial project is super interesting because there is a kind of framework, and as different practices, you are interacting with that framework in your own ways. You know, it's one assembly of a project, but also there are projects within this project. So I kind of really like that aspect of it. And I had some questions about that, and I'll come to that. And I believe that our hope is not as a kind of monologue, me giving the response and bye, but more of, you know, me saying a couple of things, maybe prompts, and then maybe kind of continue the conversation together in the time that will remain, hopefully. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to start with a small blurb of a kind of understanding the premise of the exhibition, but also, let's say, reflecting on it broadly in the two things that it's, you know, bringing together, which is the planetary and the everyday, which is something that I'm also very interested in. And the kind of, you know, I want to say a couple of things about that, and then come to certain specific points about your exhibition. So, and I thought that the best way probably to start for me would be an image that is, I was just looking at your screens, like these orange backgrounds, and it's you know, inevitably reminded me last September, actually not last, September 2020, when in San Francisco, which is where I live, we woke up to an orange sky. And your backgrounds were exactly what the atmosphere, or let's say, what was outside to us, literally. I mean, we can even compare the tones. So the scene looked like a scene from a sci-fi movie, right? Like similar to, I don't know, there are many actually examples of films like that, a kind of apocalyptic tone, but it was real. Like, and the day through the night, there was no sun in the way that we're used to. And the experience of that color shift, which lasted a day, obviously, we all know that are caused by smokes from the recent wildfires that happened at the time in the San Francisco Bay Area, but also worldwide, we saw those kinds of scenes so much from that time and around that time that it's becoming, in a strange way, a norm in a way, that for this damaged planet that we have. And environmentalist Bill McKibben actually calls this this new Earth, of maybe this background that you have as that background of that Earth. He calls it Earth with 2 A. it looks like a typo, Earth, but it's actually a new name for this new thing that we have, the Earth, as a kind of marker that the Earth is shifting as we know it. And for me, that typo or that word Earth with 2A is really what this exhibition is about, in the sense that, and I don't know if the orange, I know that the orange has repercussions to DIY or the kind of Home Depot color I've seen aesthetically, but I find another orange, I think, in the project. And I wanted to kind of start with that orange, that somehow that orange Earth or Earth with 2A asks for, and maybe that's color that you have in your backgrounds, is a reckoning to assess our place on Earth as a species, but also asking for kinds of radical changes in the way that we imagine architectural practice. Your exhibition is, as much as it's about materials, I know the elephant in the room is practice. And I think, in your own ways, you're responding to that. So, and in a kind of, in the context of architecture or let's say architectural knowledge or the field in general, if someone says we need to reimagine architectural practice today, there could be some, let's say, exhausted. I mean, people might think that there are, oh, we've been there before, we've been questioning what practice is for so long. But what's actually hinting, your exhibition is hinting, and there are many others who are thinking this way right now as we speak within our field, is that there's a dissatisfaction for certain kinds of exhausted undertakings about architectural practice itself in relation to the Earth, that it's pointing to a new place. And I'm going to say what, for instance, this practice that your exhibition is, let's say, calling for or prompting or, let's say, opening up for others to think further, is reacting to maybe certain things, and not directly reacting, but it's, in a different place. I'm saying you're in a different mindset, which I like, which is that it's not just saying that, we need to just go beyond, right, architecture to rethinking. You are within architecture, right? Like you're thinking about certain things that are so even mundane and banal and showing us the planetary within. That's the part I really appreciate about the exhibition. And I think that in a way, it's obviously, if it's about a new practice, it's a practice that calls for getting our hands messy in the sense that, engaging with the word fully, but at the same time, not trying to go beyond, but almost within. That attitude for me is very important. And I am, that's the maybe only, for me, a hopeful thing for the thing that we have, architecture, that many people are thinking about this question, the non-extractive, architecture, or there are many kind of routes that people are thinking about. And I think this exhibition is one of them that trying to expand on that discussion. And maybe more quickly to say that in 2022, maybe it's not enough to answer or come up to certain conclusions about architecture's agency in the world in relation to planetary with other things that we've done before. There has to be a new sensibility. And I think that the kind of juxtaposition of the everyday and planetary is, I think, one of them, a kind of maybe a new framing that we need to think about and question and discuss further. So in my own work, I am obsessed with that question. Maybe obsession wouldn't be an exaggeration, that I keep throwing these two words, and in my practice a lot of how does one, from an architectural perspective, think about literally the everyday and planetary together? And because I know that as much as I first started saying it's not about material, it's about practice. And one could even just add to that saying, this is also not just about practice, it's about imagination, right? These are all related words that affect our value judgments about where we stand in the world as architects, as practitioners, as thinkers, teachers. And I think that in that way, your exhibition is that plays in that notion of seeing in a way. By seeing, what I like about sound actually being in your exhibition is that it's not so much of just a visual experiment, but it's about sensibilities. It's about maybe sensing the planet through the everyday. So in some ways, the understanding, let's say, extraction and the kind of, let's say, slow. I think the keyword in when you were presenting, I as a respondent, I'm looking for this thing, but how do you start? How do you start? And the word slow seems to be obviously a kind of concurrent theme and the apparent thread among your practices around the way that you approach the exhibition. And I like the slow a lot, not just because it's geological underpinnings and the fact, because I mean, I think in Christine's video, in Nathan, like even in the sound, there was this kind of, curated, or even Amelyn's, I think the website, experience. It's like, you can't find the material that you want to fast go, and it slows things down. So there's that kind of literary interpretation, but also slowness or slow brings up this question of attention, right? Like when something is slower, you pay attention to things that you don't kind of have the chance to pay attention to. Other things come up. You understand how messy things are. So I love the kind of aspect of the slow as a kind of general theme because in a way, if you think about the slow in the context of the geology, we're talking about millions of years, and it's almost like human life in that scale is almost irrelevant, right? It's just, I mean, obviously from an Anthropocene perspective, it is very relevant that we're causing all this damage. But even within that kind of small, let's say, lifespan of a human body, or we're talking, if we slow it down further, I feel like then we can compete or maybe relate to the geology. Maybe the only way to relate to geology would be to even be more slower in the kind of slow lifespan we have. So in my work, I think that I didn't bring an image for this exhibition, which I thought that, the exhibition itself has its own kind of presence, and I'm not going to show. But I think there's an interesting kind of conversation between many practices that are also working around these issues. And it reminded me, obviously, a project that we done in 2016 with 9 Islands, where there was it was done for the Istanbul Design Biennial, created by Beatrice Colemini and Mark Wigley, and it was titled Are We Human? And we were juxtaposing, materials with models and the kind of geology as a kind of section together. And I thought that juxtaposition in our case was a literal model and drawings, but in your case, it's expanding to different media, different kinds of practices, sound, for instance, which I really like. I really like that you're kind of taking that kind of, again, uncanny relationship between those two things and expanding it with different sensibilities. And I know that the word time, if you look at performance, metrics of, professional rating systems, they use the term lead time, right? Lead time means, this is a supply chain literature, which is coming from extraction, going to the building. And you're almost like talking to them saying, it's not enough to think about just lead time. It is also the kind of millions of years of that background. The drywall, I really love that sentence in the beginning that was used about how much it takes to build the drywall versus how much it takes. It's like fossil fuels, right? Like it's the same thing, it depleted resources. So coming back to your, I want to really, I know we have a limited amount of time to bring you into that a little bit. I don't know how long we will have time to discuss, but two things I wanted to say, and you can jump in any way. One was this kind of question of practice that relates to in your own ways. I think, in Gabriel's, it was drawings, and Amelyn, I don't want to summarize anyway. Let me not try to summarize. I think it's clear. All of you kind of approach to that from that way. If anybody wants to talk about it, it would be really interesting. And second is this, again, I would say it's not just about material, it is about technological systems, right, of industrial capitalism that you're, positioning architecture within. And so that's another, I think, venue that I wanted to hear a bit more of your thoughts of what do you think kinds of conversations we need to have, alongside this exhibition and afterwards, that pedagogy or practice. And finally, this curatorial project. Again, I don't think we have time to answer or talk about all these things. I think putting them as possible one discussion point, perhaps, like if anybody wants to pick it on, or maybe to anything I said earlier, is this idea of the collective curatorial project, where it's almost like a kind of certain places where you all convene, which is the exhibition space itself, right? You had to convene in that physical space. And so that creates one assembly, but it also disassembles in the sense that there are certain places that each of your projects go and their backgrounds, there may be times, like, you know, in that way. So let me stop there and maybe go into the discussion, you know, for anything. It could be anything I said and respond to that, really. We don't have so much time, but it could also be the three things I mentioned in the end.
Great, thank you so much, Neyran. That was a really invigorating, I think, blurb of our reading of our project and then expanding on from that. And I think in the interest of time, we also want to kind of ask if the audience have any questions, they can start posting in the chat, or and we'll kind of fold that into the conversation. Maybe to kind of kick off a little bit, I think what's really kind of striking about your comments on you know, the slowness and on the like kind of attention to the kind of question of materials plus the supply chains, which are kind of immaterial, and how do we grapple between those two conditions, and they're not really two separate conditions after all. We realize they're thoroughly imbricated and entangled. And I think maybe there's and coming just kind of from my perspective, and my peers can expand on this. I think in each of our work, we've tried to overturn a little bit the status quo of what it means to home improve today, or like self-build or DIY today. And, you know, whether it's shifting from the plan to the section, to the deep section in Gabriel, as Gabriel showed, or shifting the position of the viewer in the gallery, viewing a screen, viewing a video, to the site of the desktop, the user, the workbench, just like subtle shifts, and also then the content of those things, thinking about materiality as kind of information, as slow information as well, like the kind of accrual of time into these materials, but then also how, like you said, lead time, I thought it was really interesting. And how do you even start to feel that kind of, I mean, maybe we operate at a certain speed, and then when anything is just less than on demand, you know, we get upset, or something is deeply frustrating about not getting something on time. And so why is that? And how do we unpack those logics in practice when budgets and time schedules and those kinds of operative factors press into existing practice? And so practicing out of time, or practicing off time, or in a slow building, which, you know, I think alludes to a lot of current practices in infrastructure studies and kind of broken world thinking. So maintenance, repair, and a kind of DIY, kind of, you know, re-engaging the DIY. And I think there's a kind of, and DIY is a kind of also inherently, or maybe could be more explicitly collaborative as well. It's not just like the man with his shed, I think, as the kind of popular image of Home Depot suggests, like, these are my tools and I build, and, you know, but I think there's a kind of more collective practice associated with maintaining things together and fixing rather than renewing. So I don't know, I just want to expand that for anyone else who wants to pick up.
Yeah, I think that we didn't really get into the slowness in terms of the other side of how-to videos, which is sort of the how to live slowly, which is a whole other genre, which is not necessarily instructional. They're actually purposely devoid of instruction. You're just sort of watching, almost like a movie. And I think that's you know, that's a version of slowing down that I wonder how that would play in the world of DIY home improvement, like a real time, you know, everything is sped up. It's hard to find a video on YouTube of installing something that isn't that isn't sped up by 5 times. So the message is to get it done quickly, to get to the point of being finished. But then there's that question of it's never quite finished. And I think those subtle shifts that we're talking about are kind of important in understanding, the effects of time. And I want to pick up on what you were saying, Neyran, about the orange sky, because I mean, the orange is meant to set an object apart from the sky. Like it's typically used in a construction sign to let you know of like an upcoming road work or something. So the point is, it's like, it's the opposite of the blue sky. So now it's this shift of what if that sign is now the same exact color of the sky. And right, so that our perception of what that orange means, I don't know, does it apply to the sky? Do we see the same warning when we look up at that sky? I imagine you did. I mean, it's alarming. Yeah. I think slowness is something we all value in practice, right? Because it's not something we're frequently afforded. I mean, it's when we could find moments for slowness is when maybe we value the work most.
I think that when also things slow down, it's not so much of like, okay, I'm going to spend 5 hours on something that can be done in 10 minutes, but I think that the geologic sections that Gabriel was showing, right? You're almost just kind of making, or I'm thinking of a DIY video where rather than showing how things are done quickly, I mean, we all done in construction projects. It's never you never can actually, if you're gonna, put up, there's always something that goes wrong or something that doesn't fit, or so that if the kind of slowing down in the sense of accepting that, things will go wrong, or by accepting, I don't mean psychologically, I mean acknowledging. Like, for instance, I think it's not a coincidence that when we teach architecture, we don't like to talk about budget. We don't like to get into nitty-gritty kind of things about, construction practice. And it's always in that idealized form, right? So slowness brings that appreciation or acceptance of messy, all the banal, messy things that happen within the day-to-day, activities of what we do, including mistakes, including frustrations, So I think that once we start to, I remember a moment where when I was a student, a master student, architects started to use construction pictures, which was at that time very new, because I mean, that transition, I was there, because until then they would always bring just finished products or photographs, and started to, I think now it's a norm. Architects do that, but I think maybe there is other kinds of shifts that need to happen, not just kind of this staged construction side, but all the messy things that happen, and for us to be able to talk about that. So I'm not sure about time in terms of allowances. So
I might actually, maybe just to footnote that quickly, I was thinking about, how slowness can also be fetishized, and that what I think our project is trying to do, instead of kind of cultivating a kind of just general slowness, is to contemplate labor, which is temporal, takes time. The question of revalorizing labor in architecture, I think, is also underlying a little bit the hands that show up in the video and so on. So yeah, I think Gabriel had his micro, but Irina and Christine and Bara, let us know timing wise.
Yeah. The last you were saying, it's the recognition of the time that takes even to build something. So I was thinking, while you were, in some of the things you were saying, a lot of good feedback I really appreciate. It's that I was thinking on the reuse of things too. so for example, when we see like the processes, when we talk about processes, geological processes to make the rocks, the minerals, etc., that became a shape of a building, became a building. In my practice, one thing I'm trying to do, it's like to intervene in the built environment through reusing existing spaces, for example. The reuse or transform buildings that are not necessarily has a inheritage value necessarily, but instead of demolishing, you know, or it's more like recycling existing places or spaces, and it's another layer on that, which is not only labor, but it's also bringing people together to think about how to reappropriate certain kind of spaces. So for example, the projects we have been working on with the nature residents, and now in Asian initiatives where I work, it's like bringing people to talk together about what they expect for their built environment through processes that, again, take a lot of time and bring the things you say, a lot of frustrations many times about things that not necessarily work. So it's something that in terms of practice, we could assume or recognize and taking as a part of the practice. But well, I think that in the world of everything is tried to be efficient and optimized, that it creates certain kind of conflict, you know, who paid that? That is the thing, you know, so bringing this, I don't know, I think that it's slowing and recognizing through this exhibition that everything takes so much time, you know. It's we see that our processes are not so long actually, and we can move and recycling and reusing and take our time to further the practice, I think.
Okay, so is there some question from the audience? Oh, yeah, so there's now one in the chat, so.
As you're saying, it was put in.
Should I read it or?
Yeah, probably. I don't know. Everyone is in the Zoom though, right? So yeah.
Yeah.
Are we being broadcasted at the moment or no?
No.
Okay, so everybody, yeah.
So it's a question posed by Helen. In dealing with DIY, I guess you inevitably need to confront the valorization of individual autonomy. Greece's loneliness of the project. It's a quote. And yet there is also a suggestion that geological time might be beyond simple schemas of ownership, and thus the individual subject, their project. Is DIY operative at the collective scale?
I think that's a great question, Helen. And I wonder, maybe also just to, as a conversation, but I think perhaps branding and home improvement branding has come to valorize or reinforce the idea of the kind of the lone builder or the lone maker of their own property on their own, you know, that kind of idea of, and I wonder how kind of historically if that's the case. I don't know if, I think potentially thinking about like the onset of home improvement as an industry, as opposed to repair culture that is more collective, that's maybe existed far longer than the brands that we listed today. I think maybe that kind of, so I think, yes, I think DIY is operative at the collective scale. I think that's something that potentially, I don't know, trying to operate within or adjacent, parallel to the current supply chain operations that we have that smooth out, you know, the logistical apparatus that structures the loneliness of the project, that wants you to buy your, not offcuts from your neighbor, but not even, but to kind of buy from the store, and there's a store everywhere within, you know, however square miles from your house, because so I think there's a kind of broader apparatus of contemporary production that maybe is reinforcing this autonomy project. But I think if we were to really shift that through geology, geological thinking, I wonder if, for example, like maybe mineral rights are obviously not, and by extension, property is not a kind of autonomous project at all. It kind of necessitates collective thinking on a very large scale. So I wonder if, you know, I don't know, to put pressure on property, to put pressure on whose home we're improving, or what that actually binds together as a kind of, you know, when you flip a property or whatever that is, you know, you want to improve its value, you want to renovate it, and renovation up, you know, that kind of refreshing of property is, that is, I think, a question that we don't have maybe answers to solve at this moment, but I think it is a critical point, like a point of hopefully departure that we're trying to, I guess, speculate on ways in which the collective is more the case. But yeah, I don't know if my peers, Neyran, have other reflections on that too.
I think the second part of the question is really challenging. That whether I totally agree with the sort of commodified and commercialized way we look at DIY. It could be collective, but it's not in the interest of the corporations that are providing the material for those projects. So, but in terms of geological time, I mean, just looking at the deep sections in the exhibition, I mean, to own a piece of that time, does that mean having the capital and the power to get equipment down that deep, to reach those strata of time? I mean, we as individuals really only have access to what's on the surface, and there's a lot of value deep below, but it's you know, it's like sort of that you know, open seas, like who owns what, and is there are areas where there's no ownership, and you know, or deep ocean mineral extracting, it's whoever's got the equipment and the capital to get there first sometimes can claim it. So I think those questions get kind of complicated. I don't know that I think that if any aspect of the exhibition kind of addresses them or hints at that, it would be in those sections. But yeah, that's a great question. Thanks.
So there is another question from Klara Pelušková from Prague. The question is, I was wondering whether the project could have a part 2, speculating on improvement to the point of decay, thus going beyond the notion of reuse or recycling, right into geological futures, negotiating the limits of growth beyond the 1970s ethos.
I really like this question. I mean, I like the previous one too. I mean, but the thing about the kind of thinking about part 2 is that somehow I think that those geologic sections that we've seen that Gabriel mostly presented, and the kind of, you know, main premise of the exhibition in a way, is that it's not only about, I guess, because there's the DIY, there's the Home Depot, right? It's not just this kind of consciousness that I have about, oh, depleted resources, or this drywall took 200 million years, but to bring time to kind of think about the now in relation to the past and future, and to be able to understand this kind of, like, let's say, redoing, constant, like that's the whole idea of unfinished that maybe Christine was talking about, this constant remaking, which includes the future. And I feel that somehow the kind of not accepting the finished state that we're plugging in ourselves, and that is, I think that's almost like a necessity of the project, that there is a kind of geologic future that I think it's imagining, right? It's not about the past. So I know that we're kind of in a wrapping up mode, but maybe if we could get some other comments on this, then we can slowly, going to the end.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I could speak to the sort of unfinished state. I think we started to look at the word improvement more recently, kind of after the installation and stepping back, and what does that really mean? And it really is an aspirational state. So the nature of it being unfinished, but unfinished doesn't mean it keeps kind of like exponentially growing. It could take another form. And I think the cartoons that Amelyn presented, which are the instructional sheets for uninstallation, we could, as a part 2, we could do one for every product in our planetary store. I think there's a way to think about like the next life of this material, whether it's returning it to the ground or using it in some other way.
Maybe just to build on that, and I see something new every time I read the question, so thank you, Clara. The question of measurement, of measurability, I think comes into play here. And Neyran, I know you did a whole project, an exhibition on architecture as measure, but I wonder if maybe it's not so much like the opposition to growth per se as a kind of problematic 70s term that related to other things, but I think it's measured growth, economic growth that subtends material extractions and exhaustion, that somewhere that supply chain, that pipeline needs to shift radically. And I wonder about architects' ability to measure, to make measured drawings, to in maybe one drawing that we made, redraw like kind of found materials, offcuts, and produce something out of them, or draw new templates for irregular materials that are discarded or so on. And so I don't know what that means yet, but I think it's not about stopping work or as a kind of design question. It's not about not not designing, but I think it's about designing kind of other forms of measurement and other tools that then can so as what Gabriel mentioned, like reorganize labor differently, shift supply chains differently, which seems again like pretty hyper object, right? Like how do you change the notion of lead time? But I think there's something about a cultural shift, which DIY is a kind of culture, and if something like lead time or kind of questions of demand and on demand are addressed at the cultural level, like the kind of space of why do I expect my orders in 4 hours, like, or whatever the Amazon time, like lead time is now, that you can do that, and is that even like what is the limit to that growth? And when I mean growth, it is a kind of shortening. It's kind of shortening of time, which is kind of, I guess, mixed up in the project. So I wonder if we want to wrap up slowly or zoom out slowly. I think these are really useful kind of questions to think about the extended life of the project. I think that's why we wanted digital artifacts embedded in the physical exhibition and vice versa. And so there is a second life, as I think Christine shared the link to our store early on, where you can slowly peruse or at least watch your screen scroll to the Archean era while not shopping. So I think that's it. What do you think?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, if there's one more question, or if you want to add something, Nathan or Gabriel or the rest of you, so if you want to have like some final thought or something to share, so please, or one last question. Otherwise, yeah. Okay, probably. So thanks everyone for joining us today, and thanks to all the speakers and our respondent for this event. And yeah, as I said already, if you are in Prague, don't forget to stop at the Viper to see the exhibition. So thank you, and have a nice evening, morning. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.